Hello, hello. Let's talk about how I write music. This is going to be a pretty broad overview because it's difficult for me to actually explain. There's a lot of variables and a lot of things that don't really have a rhyme or reason. That being said, I want to go over a few things to keep in mind with this video. I write music in chunks, so while I'm referring to maybe one riff or one section of a song, this process applies to the entire track for me. There are cases where I will completely finish an intro of a song to the point where it's finalized before I even know what the first verse might be. I don't always write with MIDI instruments, but everything I'm talking about here will be with the mindset that we're writing in a purely MIDI environment. So let's get into it. Inspiration. It all starts by getting inspired. Sometimes I'll be at work just humming a melody over and over until I just record it. Sometimes it comes from listening to anything from PS1 soundtracks to the newest song from a band. Then there are times where I'm just jamming on one of my guitars and I find a riff that just sticks with me. Writing it down. Next, I'll want to get the idea out of my head. Since the idea can be stemming from guitar, but not always a guitar, I tend to write very rough melodies out on the piano. There's not really much rhythm or an idea of how the song's going to go at this point, but there's a string of notes that I do know I want to use. Building and experimenting. My initial ideas tend to bloom into something vastly different than where I started. I'll take a string of notes and just plot them into a MIDI chart for Shreddage. Then I'll build off that to create 2 to 4 measures. Once I have a bare bones idea, I'll spend a while building off of that idea and experimenting with changes. At this point, I'll have a basic drum pattern laid out just to give this part of the song a specific feeling. Commitment, commit to it, commit or...
Do it! Just do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams.
Once I have the shell of a riff that I really like, I'll go through adding key switches, effects, and humanizing the guitar. At this point, the goal is to take that idea, commit to it, and give it the final form. The idea is to bring the basic MIDI to the point that it sounds like a guitarist is playing the riff or the riffs for me. Now that I have my guitar recorded, I'm going to pay attention to the drums. In the absence of a drum kit, I tend to tap out the pattern or air drum to the riff on repeat. I already have the idea of the feel or the groove of the part because I've laid out a basic drum pattern, but I'm looking to give this my own personal feel. Finishing touches. I really don't like the way that sounded playing back in my headphones. At this point, I have a very good foundation. The riff sounds great, the drums feel good, and I'm nodding my head along with the beat. Since most of the music I'm writing is some form of metal or progressive rock, I'll take the root or lowest notes from what the guitar's playing and program that on the bass. From there, I'll add to the bass just to liven it up if needed. Now that the main trio of instruments are done, I like to go through and add effects like huge snares, bass drops, and reverse cymbals. The placement always depends on the song, but I love adding those things to make a heavy-hitting section hit just a little bit harder. Depending on the track, I'll also add things like a choir, or a piano, or synth as well. Like I said before, this process would actually just extend to an entire song, so at this point I've either demoed out an entire song and I'm going through and finalizing everything, adding those effects, or I've finalized one specific section of a song and it's time to just move on to the next part of the song. Every song is going to be unique and will vary for me. Some songs are more driven by a vocal melody or a drum pattern. I really never know when inspiration's going to strike, and I try not to force myself to write anything. I feel like the most important thing when it comes to creating music is to just have fun and try and impress yourself. Try to dial things up a notch, but give yourself a finish line. Critique your work, but learn to appreciate your talents.